Hi friends, and welcome back to the channel! Today we are going to talk about how to shift gears correctly on a motorcycle. First, we'll go over the standard shifting method, the simplest and most straightforward approach, which works perfectly for beginners. Then we'll look at a slightly more advanced technique that allows you to shift faster and smoother. After that, we'll also look at some common mistakes which a lot of riders tend to make, and not necessarily only beginners. Very often, these mistakes show up even in riders who have been riding for quite a while, but have never really stopped to think about the shifting process and just learned to do it by instinct. Let's look at how the basic shifting process actually works. We'll start with upshifting. Let's say we are accelerating, the bike gains some speed, and the engine RPM rises. At some point, the RPM becomes high enough, so we want to shift up a gear. So the RPM drops back into a comfortable range. The standard upshift sequence is simple. Close the throttle and pull in the clutch to disconnect the engine from the gearbox. Then, with your left foot, lift the shifter lever all the way up and release it, thus selecting the next higher gear. After that, release the clutch to reconnect the engine. If you want to keep accelerating, open the throttle again. That's it! The upshift is done. Even though this all sounds like a long process when I describe it, in practice it usually takes less than a second. Close the throttle, pull in the clutch, upshift, release the clutch, open the throttle. With practice, it becomes very quick. Now let's look at downshifting. The sequence is pretty similar. Close the throttle, pull in the clutch, press the shifter lever down firmly, release it, and then begin releasing the clutch. But here is an important detail. When downshifting, the clutch must be released much more smoothly than during upshifting. That's because right after the downshift, the bike's velocity stays the same, but the gear becomes lower. That means for the same wheel speed, the engine now needs to spin faster. In other words, the RPM must increase. So now, if we just suddenly release the clutch, the rear wheel will rapidly spin the engine up. You'll hear the RPM jump sharply. At the same time, according to Newton's third law of motion, the engine will be slowing the rear wheel sharply. This effect is called engine braking. If you just dump the clutch during a downshift, that engine braking can create a strong jerk, which may destabilize the motorcycle, especially on slippery surfaces. To avoid this, the clutch must be released slowly and in controlled manner during a downshift. This gives the engine and gearbox time to match their rotational speeds smoothly. The smoother you release the clutch, the smoother the shift will feel. So in the end, the sequence is this. Close the throttle, pull in the clutch, press the shifter down, release the clutch smoothly, and then open the throttle again if needed. Generally, the standard shifting method we just discussed for both up and down shifting works perfectly on any motorcycle. For normal day-to-day riding, it's sufficient. However, if you want, you can learn a slightly more advanced technique that allows you to shift faster and smoother. We'll start again with upshifting, since it's simpler, and then move on to downshifting. For an upshift now, instead of performing each step separately, closing the throttle, pulling in the clutch, lifting the lever, releasing the clutch and reopening the throttle, we will combine everything into one smooth motion. Almost simultaneously we do three things. With the throttle we make a quick roll-off and immediately roll it back on, which looks like this. At the same time, we pull in and release the clutch, and while the clutch is disengaged, we lift the shifter lever. It all blends into one coordinated move. A quick throttle dip, a clutch squeeze, and an upward shift. Essentially, it's just a much faster version of the standard method, where 5 separate steps become one fluid motion. The shift takes only a fraction of a second, feels very smooth, and the power transfer interruption is minimal. You can barely feel the shift at all. When it comes to downshifting, the principle is similar, but there is one important difference. And again, it has to do with engine braking. Now, when downshifting, we add one extra element, the so-called rev match, or throttle bleed. This is a short, quick twist of the throttle which looks like this. Its purpose is to match the engine RPM to the gearbox speed and prevent harsh engine braking. Here is how such downshifting works. You quickly pull in the clutch, press the shifter lever down, and at the same time give a brief throttle blip. Again, everything happens almost simultaneously. Clutch in, short throttle blip, and while the clutch is disengaged, shift down, then quickly release the clutch. What's the point of the throttle blip here? Remember, in the standard shifting method, we had to release the clutch very smoothly when downshifting to avoid a sharp engine braking jerking. After selecting a lower gear, the engine needs to spin faster for the same road speed. If you just dump the clutch, the wheel and engine speeds equalize abruptly, creating a strong backward jerk. The throttle blip solves this. By briefly raising the engine RPM just before reconnecting it to the gearbox, we bring the engine speed closer to what it needs to be in the lower gear. When the clutch is released, the angular speeds of the engine and the gearbox are already nearly matched, so there is no sudden braking impulse. The downshift becomes quick and smooth. This more advanced method isn't really as difficult as it might sound. With some practice, it feels as natural as the standard technique. The only thing is that initially it takes a bit of a practice. The clutch pull, throttle blip and gear change must all line up in timing and flow together as one motion. At first it probably won't be perfect. The bike may jerk or a gear might not engage smoothly. That's normal. However, at first it is better to practice somewhere where there is no traffic. You don't want to misshift somewhere in the dense traffic as you are trying to overtake some semi-truck. Once you find the right rhythm and build it into your muscle memory, your shifting will become extremely smooth and quick. Now that we've looked at the shifting techniques, let's go over some common mistakes. But first, as per good old YouTube tradition, a quick sponsor break. As always, today's sponsor is Ultramax Cell, advanced base layers that work across a wide temperature range, which makes them ideal for motorcyclists. Their special 3D structure allows them to do two opposite things depending on the conditions. In hot weather, with ventilated riding gear on top, the honeycomb structure increases the evaporation surface. Moisture is pulled away from your body and evaporates faster, which improves your cooling. In cold weather, when worn under windproof gear, that same structure helps trap warm air and keep you warmer. If you like riding comfortably in any weather, check out Ultramax Cell using the link in the description. The first mistake we already mentioned briefly – dumping the clutch during a downshift. This causes abrupt engine braking, which can destabilize the motorcycle. To avoid this, remember to release the clutch smoothly and give the engine and gearbox time to match their speeds. The next common mistake is leaving the left foot hanging near the shifter lever instead of returning the foot peg. It may seem minor, but it creates two problems. First, when leaning the bike, a foot hanging lower than the foot peg can be caught by the asphalt. Second, you risk an accidental gear change. If your foot hangs near the lever and you hit a bump, you might unintentionally press the shifter and shift out the gear at the wrong moment. That can seriously unsettle the motorcycle if done at the wrong moment. The correct habit is very simple. Shift, then immediately return your foot to the foot peg. The third very common mistake is shifting up too early, when the engine hasn't yet reached sufficient RPM, but the rider already selects the next gear. There are two main reasons for shifting up too early. The first is the desire to make the motorcycle feel smoother. Beginners often like that the bike reacts slower to the throttle in the higher gears. The throttle response becomes softer and it feels easier to control. That's all fine, but if you shift too early, you sacrifice performance. If you accelerate from very low RPM, the bike feels really sluggish. So if you feel a bit intimidated by your bike's acceleration instead of constantly short shifting, it is better to improve your throttle precision and learn to control the throttle smoothly, so the bike doesn't jerk. The second reason is common among car drivers who only then started riding bikes. Most cars redline around 6–7,000 RPM. On motorcycles, the engine may easily rev to 11, 12 or even 13 5,000. So someone used to keeping a car engine at 2,000–3,000 RPM may feel that motorcycle at 5,000–6,000 is already screaming at its limit, when in reality it's just starting to pull properly. Because of this, such riders tend to shift too early and try to keep the engine at low RPM like in a car. But most motorcycle engines are designed to operate at much higher revs, and there is no need to be afraid of them. If you want to be a bit more technical, you can look up the torque curve for your engine. The torque plateau shows the most effective RPM range. That's where you generally want the engine to operate. If you don't want to study graphs or can't find them for your bike, just go by feel. If you open the throttle and the bike responds immediately and pulls you forward quickly, you're in the right range. If you open the throttle and the bike feels really sluggish until the RPM rises and only then starts pulling strongly, you're probably shifting too early. Next time, let the engine rev a bit higher. Another common mistake is the so-called false neutral. You'll often hear some riders say, "My gearbox is bad. It feels vague and imprecise." In most cases, the problem isn't the gearbox, but the shifting technique. False neutrals happen when the gear doesn't fully engage and you end up in an intermediate position between two gears. Just like there is a neutral between first and second, which is intentional, you can accidentally land in a similar in-between position between other gears if you don't shift decisively. Why does this happen? Because with most motorcycle controls, we learn to be smooth and often use only part of the whole range. Like for example, we rarely open the throttle all the way. But the gear lever is different. It needs to be pressed or lifted firmly and all the way to the very end of its travel. If you operate the lever too carefully without applying enough force or without pushing it all the way, the gear may not engage fully. You accelerate, try to shift, hit a false neutral, open the throttle, and the engine revs, but the bike doesn't accelerate because no torque is being transmitted to the rear wheel. To avoid this, move the shifter firmly and all the way. Decisive, full movements of the shifter lever dramatically reduce the chance of false neutrals. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button, and if you like to support the channel, check out my Patreon page. There I publish extended version of my videos and go deeper into different aspects of motorcycle riding, because I can afford to ignore the YouTube algorithm and focus purely on content itself, without clickbaits, ads, artificial time limits and all the other usual YouTube stuff. If you find this useful, I'll be glad to see you among the channel's sponsors. And if you want to fully unlock your potential as a motorcycle rider, learn to ride confidently and safely, and not spend the next 20 years figuring everything out on your own, then check out my King of the Road course. Over 9 weeks and 50 lessons, you'll learn a wide range of advanced riding techniques and lock them in through practice with more than 40 special exercises. So check it out. And that's all I've got for you today. Thank you for watching, ride safely, and have a wonderful day. Bye!